This is a picture, for example, of the shipping you see in Canadian waters in 2012. A lot is small vessels going into supply shipping up around these little communities up here. This is the Northwest Passage through here, where, you know, depending on the season, you get various boats, private boats and others going through. We have quite a strict regime in that area because they're declared internal waters, a system of regulations that really does require permission of the Canadian government for larger vessels to go through, strict regulations. So, I mean, the Polar Code, in some ways, the existing Canadian regulations in the Arctic are stronger than the Polar Code provisions. But here you see something rather interesting where it all stops right here in at the border between Canada and the United States. Something that has happened in the last few years, which I'm really very pleased about, is rather extensive better communication and cooperation between the Coast Guards, between other organizations like the Marine Exchange, on what I believe should be done, which is if you're looking at the future of the Bering Sea, you have to think about the Beaufort, and you have to think about the long-term possibilities of marine corridors that go right around Alaska, through the Canadian Northwest Passage and down with Greenland down south. It's going to happen over the very long term, and I think it's very important that we think about it now. We've had a number of vessels through. This cruise ship went through 2 or 3 years ago. This was the Nordic Orion, a bulk carrier which went from Vancouver to Finland 2 years ago. It was really, in a way, the first commercial pure transit of the Northwest Passage, though we have many, many ships going through there for other reasons, doing partial or sort of regional trade. This was another new ice-breaking bulk carrier owned by one of our mining companies going through the Northwest Passage last year. This one needed no support from any icebreakers because it's quite a formidable vessel itself. This is the Canadian problem. The Canadian problem is that even though the ice is melting dramatically, the volume of ice is diminishing tremendously. So this is a comparison of current pattern and 20 years ago. The ice tends to accumulate, as was said, along this coast here because of the circulation in the Arctic Ocean. So that's important, but it's not going to be permanent, because if current trends continue, I think so.
I do want to go back to your first slide at the end, if you could.
Sure.
You had that air transit program.
Oh, yeah. That's right. You got to make sure everyone gets out. Hi, Clem. How are you?
False alarm? Ladies and gentlemen, it's a false alarm, been confirmed, so other than the noise for a second, we should have it turned off. Yeah. So the fire alarm guy's right on it, so you may try to escape, but you don't need to.
Yeah, your first slide that had kind of had that. You had that air corridor or marine corridor.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be interesting.
The little ones.
Sure. Go back to those and just talk.
Yeah. Because it was air as well as.
Yeah.
It was quite a complex. It was a great initiative. It's the best one that most people ever worked in government on.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit. That air corridor was a harbinger of what could happen.
It is. No, it's somebody obviously objects.
There we go.
So I mentioned that. But anyway, I'm gonna. They're missing it. Skip around. One of my dear bosses. They're calling me back.
Well, I want to start by being a longtime resident of Homer, not as long as you, obviously, of the area, but I was going to say hello.
Give everybody a couple minutes.
I'd like to.
That was interesting. You mentioned Rubicon.
I love that. I just
Something
what
I've worked on
happened.
a lot.
I think I got it right. You know, it's
We were certainly cutting Seattle and Portland's grass.
I spent 3 days there offshore in their plants and all their details on how they're moving cargo. It's really impressive. That I've been down to LALB and I watch how laborious and how hard it is to get a TPU off the ship onto the beach, forklift over to a truck to rail, and some freights.
That exists to the development of the Canadian Northwest Passage, for example, in comparison with the Northern Sea Route. So this is a projection from one academic looking at climate change models of what types of vessels would be able to go through the Northern Sea Route, the Central Sea Route, and the Northwest Passage at different times, not counting on the use of large icebreakers. And one can see that looking forward 20, 30 years, the Northwest Passage would become a very viable route. It could become viable much more before that, depending on the use of icebreakers and much better navigation systems and better search and rescue and better charting and all the things that we lack. In fact, when I hear a description of Alaskan shipping and some of the problems there, it's really I'm really struck by the similarity of these two of our two countries and the challenges we face up there. And I should say how as you all know, how good relations at the basic level between Canada and the United States are, and it's true in the Arctic as well. Coast Guard to Coast Guard, military to military, through NORAD, Northern Command, and so forth, through scientist to scientist, through many areas. But there is not really a high-level dialogue, political dialogue, between Canada and the United States on where to go next in terms of mutual benefit. Obviously, the United States looks at the Bering Straits, looks at the partnership in Russia, and over the long term, we'll be looking at a strengthened partnership with Canada. We simply have to do that. Geopolitically, it's essential. Because also, if you look at Russian behavior in the Ukraine, you have to put a little question mark about what the Northern Sea Route would look like under a kind of negative scenario. I hope that, I neither expect nor hope that that will happen, but being aware that there is an option, a geopolitical option to the Northern Sea Route, i.e. the Northwest Passage, is something to bear in mind. Meade asked me to say a word or two about the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system as an example of how a corridor can deal with issues of sovereignty through cooperation. There's a number of locks here. Some are American and some are Canadian. A ship passing through the Great Lakes and Lawrence Seaway system goes from one sovereignty area to another sovereignty area kind of seamlessly. It's been developed since the 50s, and it's turned out to be, we just take it for granted, that it's a very effective way of developing a marine corridor essentially through the St. Lawrence right through to Lake Superior. And it's still a very valuable bulk cargo system. It's also many new security features have been added to it since 9/11. Canadian police going on American ships, American police, Canadian, and vice versa, so that one can achieve, as we have in other areas of Canada-U.S. relations, enormous amounts through pragmatic cooperation. Also, for those who may be moments where you're losing faith in the future of Arctic development. I was looking at the history of this, and it was immensely controversial for nearly 50 years before it was finally done in the 1950s by Eisenhower. There were treaties signed but not ratified by the Congress in the 30s and then the 40s. It was enormously controversial. There were people opposed to it and everything else, but if you get the right idea and you follow through with it, and you're persistent, and you don't give up, you can achieve wonders. It just takes time. And that, I think, is what's going to happen in terms of Arctic navigation. This is just a reference to some of the things that have been happening through the St. Lawrence Seaway through this Beyond the Borders initiative between the two countries, which is one of the achievements in Canada-U.S. relations in the last few years. This is just something that I've been playing with. Just a reminder that the shortest distance, say, between Tokyo and Montreal or New Jersey is through the Northwest Passage, not through the Northern Sea Route. Or this one, which is my favorite slide, which is looking at the fact that the distance from Seattle to New Jersey is less through the Northwest Passage than through the Panama Canal. This is the next thing we're all going to have to think about and worry about coming through next summer. I think it'll make the search and rescue people, give them hives thinking about this thing, because our Arctic anyway is still a very dangerous, tricky, uncharted place. We should never ever forget that. The climate, the night, the risks, the hard ice, the changes to ice, changes to climate patterns as a result of ice. In my view, all of those are manageable with resources and time over decades. But this, I'm sure this will be as well done as can be done, but it's we're a long way from the kind of cruise tourism that you can see in Alaska, or you can see Europeans going to southern part of Greenland or up to Svalbard or so forth. This is the kind of ship that should be our model, I think. We must always realize how much money and how much effort is going into the Russian Arctic. This is an example of the type of ships that are being constructed through a kind of Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Canadian consortium. The icebreaker LNG tankers to carry LNG from the big Russian developments in the Yamal Peninsula to natural gas importers in East Asia. These are custom-designed vessels for Arctic conditions. I think the future will bring us more and more ships like that. Anyway, I'm going to just leave it at that. You see where I'm coming from, which is to focus on cooperation as much as possible, cooperation at many levels. An organization that I've worked with quite closely is the Arctic Caucus of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. It brings together the governments, private sectors of Alaska, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. They've talked about increasing cooperation in the Beaufort Sea, navigation, oil and gas development, deepwater port, perhaps off the coast of the Yukon. Anyway, there are many, many possibilities and many channels, but in Canada-U.S. relations, we obviously have to work on all different aspects, given the fragmentation of responsibility in both countries for Arctic development. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. And I do think it's interesting. You put the cruise ship up there, and you'll think about the nascent period of the cruise industry in Alaska. And of course, to many of us, the Princeton Dam incident was something that comes to mind of in some respects, lack of preparedness, lack of understanding of what could go wrong with a mass rescue operation. You take a look even to this day at Casa Concordia and what took place in a very populated, easy to get to place, warm water situation in the Mediterranean with the loss of life and a disaster that just happened 2.5 years ago there. It's not too big a stretch to talk about the kinds of things that are likely to happen or could happen with increased activity in the Arctic, and particularly over the northern Northwest Passage and the challenges that you have getting through there. So our next speaker is Felix Schutte, who's going to talk to us a little bit about his work as the president and owner of Schutte Group.